There's a couple major Nintendo stories we have to talk about today, starting with some very unfortunate news around something we will continue to see happen as we go more towards an all-digital future in gaming, and that is the 3DS and Wii U store are officially scheduled to be shut down permanently. Then the good news story for today's video and the main talking point has to do with the graphical fidelity of the Nintendo Switch and a very quiet secret upgrade that has just been discovered and what this means for the future of graphical performance on the Nintendo Switch as a whole. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, we got a couple massive stories to get through today, and we have to kick it off with a conversation around the recent announcement that Nintendo will be indeed discontinuing the Wii U eShop and 3DS eShop in March of 2023 for all future purchases. And you know, this is one of those real downside topics to an all digital gaming future, as we will continue to see it become the more prevalent way to buy games, the same way we've seen it slowly happen to music and movies. It's pretty clear at this point in time that games are headed in this direction as well. And while I will always personally buy physical as long as it is an option, as things like this is kind of one of the upsides that you can look at with physical collecting, as on my Wii U I do own most of my games physically and I'll always just be able to pop in the disc. Of course, if you've already purchased these titles, this is something that doesn't affect you as much if you don't think you want anything else from the eShop, but it's one of those things that once that flip gets switched and the servers go down, you will no longer have access to purchase any of the games that are a part of either of those eShop's library. And the thing about the Wii U and 3DS library is it is a fantastic collection of Nintendo titles, some of which you can really only find on those eShops, and not to mention the fact that the Wii U is the one system that allowed us to play DS games on a TV screen, with the touchscreen being of course your gamepad. So there's going to be some real big functionality and some real classic titles that just die unfortunately on this platform once this plug gets pulled. And to kick off the conversation, I do want to quickly hop over to VGC where they have an exact breakdown of what is scheduled to happen, and then I'll share some tips afterwards of what you should do if you want to make sure you get some of these games before they do go away permanently. So let's quickly read through this article together. Nintendo is officially ceasing 3DS and Wii U eShop purchases. Users will no longer be able to purchase digital games from March 2023. Nintendo has announced it will cease digital game purchases on Wii U and Nintendo 3DS systems in March 2023. From that date onwards, it will no longer be possible to make purchases in the Nintendo eShop for either system or download free content, including game demos. According to Nintendo, after late March 2023 and for the foreseeable future, it will still be possible to re-download games and DLC, receive software updates, and play online on Wii U and 3DS. This is part of a natural life cycle for any product line as it becomes less used by consumers over time, the company said. We are providing this notice more than a year in advance of the end of purchases, so users will have plenty of time to prepare. The closure means that many digital-only Wii U and 3DS games will essentially disappear from next year unless users have already purchased them. Now, there's then a separate headline from a different article that I want to quickly read on VGC, as they've done an analysis on how many digital-only games will go away, and they've said the following. Analysis: up to 1,000 digital-only games will disappear when Nintendo closes its 3DS and Wii U stores. So regardless of if you own a 3DS, Wii U, or both, this is definitely a moment to reflect on the downside of digital-only purchases, especially when we don't see a game get a physical release and it's not even marketed as an option, as over 1,000 total games that were at one time available to download and purchase and play will effectively just be erased, unless if by some miracle a lot of them get licensing renewals to be sold on modern platforms, and that's just not the case, and that almost never happens with games unless there's money to be made off of a HD remaster or port, and clearly that's not the case for a lot of the Wii U and 3DS digital only games that were once available. And you know, I think back to times like when I'll have a friend over and I have my entire retro collection that I like to sometimes pop in a old classic game and play Donkey Kong Country 2 on the original SNES hardware every now and then. Of course, that's harder to do with lack of HDMI inputs and things like that, but there are ways around that, and I've always liked having that option. direction. And imagine living in a world where for some reason, over the years, your digital data is just wiped, or you can't get that exact console anymore. Maybe you've lost it in a move or something like that, and you want to go back and play through an old classic game that you remember, but it was only released digitally. Well, now we're in a reality where that's just not possible, and you're either going to have to track that down through buying a console for probably a ridiculous price on eBay with that software already installed, or it's just purely not going to be possible to play it outside of course, emulation tactics. And that's why I'm a fan of emulation at the end of the day, not illegally when you don't own the game, but when you do own the game, having another way to play it, because this is a very real reality that we will start to see games disappear as we see more of a focus on digital only releases. So I want to hear from you guys on your thoughts and feelings about the Wii U and 3DS store going away, how it'll affect you, and also if you don't own, maybe the Wii U, since that one clearly didn't sell as well, if you're planning on tracking one down and maybe trying to get some of those titles downloaded before that March 2023 date, and how you feel about these shops going away as a whole. So please share all your thoughts and feelings on all things Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShop closure in the comments down below. Now, the other story we're talking about today is a really exciting and interesting one, in my opinion, as it has to do with a somewhat silent or secret update that Nintendo has added in quietly to one of the new upcoming Nintendo Switch game releases, and it suggests them using an entirely new upscaling technology that up to this point in time we have not seen them utilize, and it could be a very good indication of some plans that Nintendo has in place to help games continue to run smoother on the Switch at frame rates like 60 FPS that we highly criticize here on the channel when games like Sonic Colors Ultimate release, and of course the Switch version only runs at 30 and the other platforms run at 60. There's also of course the 4K conversation to be had, and while this may not be the exact technology that allows that, it is definitely a step in the right direction, especially if Nintendo plans to continue to use the Tegra X1 throughout the rest of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle. So to go over the details of what's been found here and exactly what this technology is, which is known as AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution, let's quickly hop over to Nintendo Life, where they have a nice little breakdown of what this tech is and how it's already been implemented in one Nintendo Switch title and why it could mean big things and good changes for the future. So let's quickly read through that together. Nintendo could be using AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution to boost Switch performance, an unholy alliance alongside the NVIDIA GPU. As spotted by NW Player 123 in the test version download of Nintendo Switch Sports, the game is utilizing a license for AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution technology. This is actually open source and free to use, but monetized projects still need to acknowledge its use in licensed packages like those below. Right now, Nintendo seems to just be utilizing it in this particular game, but if the results are good, it's not inconceivable that this could be used in other projects. You can then quickly see the tweet that pointed out that AMD licensing right is indeed tied to Nintendo Switch Sports. And then to further break down what this tech actually does, let's continue to read through. So what is it? PC Gamer goes into the technology a bit further, and the official website also showcases its potential impact on game performance. If you may recall, in the past there's been excitable chat around how future Nintendo hardware could use NVIDIA's DLSS, a super sampling technology that could make games on Switch 2 output in 4K while running at a lower resolution natively. It's a way to get impressive results while accommodating weaker chipsets, which is inevitably the case with mobile-like hardware. The trouble is that the Tegra X1 GPU in the Switch can't support DLSS. AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution is a little bit different in its core goals though. It does upscale the image to make it look sharper even at a lower resolution, but doesn't do this through fancy AI. It's an algorithm that can theoretically work on most systems and cards. It's applied on a game-by-game basis and works on NVIDIA chipsets too. The upscaling is technically the secondary reason to use it, as the main benefit highlighted is that upscaling the image can allow for stronger performance and frame rate while still, to most eyes and particularly during gameplay, looking like it's running at a good resolution. With Nintendo Switch Sports as an example, let's make an assumption that Nintendo wants to run it at 60 FPS but was struggling to lock it in. Technology like this AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution can, when utilized effectively, help you hit performance targets while theoretically taking less of a hit to the visuals and output resolution. Now, if you guys want a super deep dive on exactly how this technology works and what it's doing, I will have a Digital Foundry video linked in the description down below under the sources section, where you can go down the rabbit hole on exactly how this tech works. But it's a very exciting open source tech that Nintendo is choosing to implement for the first time, and depending on how the results come out with this particular Nintendo Switch Sports title, we may see them start to utilize this for future projects, maybe even update existing games, which I would think is less likely, but I do think that this this is something that could ultimately prolong the life of the Tegra X1 chipset, as we know that thing was manufactured and put out on the market originally in 2015, and then of course sold in the base Switch model when it launched in March of 2017. And we are now in a world of 2022 where that chipset is just clearly outdated. And while we recently got the OLED model, it still uses that Tegra X1, although that dock situation with the dock being able to be upgraded is still kind of suspect in my opinion. And whether or not Nintendo does the slow revisions as part of the Switch lifecycle, or if they actually do a next-gen break-off, remains to be seen, as we could see them go one route or the other. They could simply go the smartphone route, where they put out every year or every other year a new revision of the Switch in some form, and it just slowly gets more powerful over time, but while being fully backwards compatible with the original OG Switch titles. Regardless of what direction you think Nintendo is going with that, I love to see tech implemented that will essentially make games run better and smoother at the end of the day. And regardless of if it ups the resolution or not, it is going to be a good sign, mostly for games not being locked to 30 FPS and getting that true upgrade to 60 FPS, as that is a very noticeable difference to me when I'm playing games. If you ever haven't had a side-by-side comparison, go ahead and boot up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, play it in single player mode, then put it into multiplayer mode locally where it splits the screen. You will notice exactly how fragmented and choppy the multiplayer feed looks compared to the original single player, because the single player runs at 60, the multiplayer runs at 30, and it is a huge deal, especially for games with a lot of motion. So maybe this is how we get a little bit more life out of this OLED model before we have to talk about a more powerful revision, maybe the next gen Switch in something like 2024. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on both the stories we talked about in the comments down below. How do you feel about the death of the Wii U and 3DS eShop? And definitely let me know what you think this AMD tech being in Nintendo Switch Sports means for the future of other Nintendo Switch titles, and if you're hyped about the tech being implemented like I am. So I do look forward to hearing from you guys on both the stories we talked about today in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Make sure you check out yesterday's video if you haven't already, where we talk about a surprise way that you can play the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe DLC for free. And please make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.